Hello and welcome to the Convex Conversation with me, journalist Helen. This week I'm at RAF Scampton in Lincolnshire, home of the iconic Red Arrows. 2021 is the Reds' 57th season since 1965, and after a challenging year, they're back in the skies, displaying for Her Majesty, world leaders and mere mortals like us. Wing Commander David Montenegro, or Monty as everyone calls him, is in charge, and he's the first person to be a Red Arrows display pilot, their leader, Red 1, and now officer commanding. Monty, it feels a real privilege to be back here at Scampton. This is such a special place. What does it mean to you?
The relationship that many people in Lincolnshire, probably the United Kingdom, have with RAF Scampton is very emotive. There has been some phenomenal history made from this base, dating all the way back to the 1920s. But I think probably the Dam Buster raids and the World War II activity very much signposted what RAF Scampton has contributed as a base and as a community to this country. And it moved on from those iconic and incredibly courageous sorties to Cold War era, where you've had the Vulcan based from here. I mean, that's pretty evocative time, I think, in our aviation history, let alone world history. And then for us, as you move on now into the 2020s, and, you know, we've been operating here for many, many years. So Central Flying School was actually based here. So many pilots that came through either as fast jet pilots or helicopter pilots or indeed transport aircraft pilots, at some stage would have had touch points with RAF Scampton many years ago. So it's at the heart of certainly the Royal Air Force, indeed the country. And for the Red Arrows, it's been our training ground for so long. You know, you have an intimate relationship with it. Not just because we train over it, but because we know every single centimetre of the ground here because of the way we position the show and we need to train. And it's just a very special place. I think there's not a single day I come to work as a wing commander, as privileged to be officer commanding this team, that genuinely I think about that history every day. It might be a second worth of thought, it might be 10 minutes worth, but you really do sense it here at RAF Scampton.
It's funny, there's almost a lovely feeling of stepping back in time in a way. I mean, I'm from Lincolnshire originally, and so aware of a lot of the history around here, but I just love it. I think it's, I don't know, you can smell it, you can taste it. And what has been fantastic on this trip is to see your team back in the skies. I mean, that must be such a huge relief to you after the last year we and the whole world have gone through.
It is a relief. It's nice to be back in the skies in front of the public. We actually were back in the skies within 3 weeks of the first lockdown. For all of us, it was a seismic shift in what was going to happen in all of our lives, no matter what you do. But we were told very quickly, you will continue to train. And if there is an opportunity in 2020, make sure that there is a defence or an RAF contribution to the British public. You need to be ready to do that. So that the mandate was set. It was a bit of a voyage of discovery for us of how could we safely bring people into the workplace, make sure that we could do critical air safety, engineering safety aspects, make sure that the whole psychology of the team was correct, because we would have all had phenomenal stresses in our domestic lives due to COVID. So that was a really incredible leadership challenge. And I'm so pleased to say that the last week and a half where we've been back in the public eye at the most elaborate level, particularly last weekend, is really payback of that year and a half worth of training and knuckling down here, keeping ourselves safe, trying to keep a positive attitude and keeping the skill sets, because they're incredibly perishable here, up to the standard that we can now go and deliver into 2021. Having said that, we had some pretty big events in 2020. And I think probably the most memorable one was the very first one where we celebrated Victory in Europe Day. And on that commemoration, there's quite a lot of angst about how would the public perceive the Red Arrows doing a fly past over London during lockdown. We weren't sure if there would be a negative connotation with the fact that we'd continue to work where maybe we shouldn't have worked. It was brilliant. The public response was phenomenal. And it was another reminder to us of how close that relationship is between the Red Arrows, the Royal Air Force, and the British public specifically here. One of the nicest things about that trip and that sortie as we left Scampton and then returned to Scampton is because we were in lockdown, all we could see is people in back gardens waving that we wouldn't normally see. They'd been off doing something else. And I call that brilliant positive collateral, because our main aiming point was Horse Guards Parade in London. It was televised thanks to the BBC. It actually did a pre-record and we were part of the main event with a huge outreach actually in a lockdown period. But for me, it was looking at the public in the back gardens waving, and you could always see them smiling at some points. So that was really special for us. And it was testament to the fact that the mandate was there to continue and, one element of our payback.
So many questions spring from your first answer. I mean, one of the things I'd like to ask you is how you managed that leadership challenge and how you did manage to keep the team motivated, take care of everybody's personal mental health and what they were going through at home. How did you, as officer commanding, do that?
The first element I made clear to myself is that everyone's situation is different. Everyone has a different personal struggle at home. When you come into the work environment, I knew to keep communicating however we could do that, even if it's 2 meters apart or remotely, is to make sure that those lines of communication stayed open, because they're quite easy to shut down, I think, particularly in the remote environment. One aspect of that is we had a large part of the squadron in work, but of course, not everyone was essential to that type of activity. So I had members of the squadron that didn't come to work for many weeks. So just making sure we had all corners covered. And that really was done through my senior leadership team because, we have leaders throughout the squadron. I have the overall responsibility, but through my leadership team and everyone at every level, making sure the feedback to me is that we were looking after our own people. We were making sure they're okay, supporting them. And if the service was brilliant in that regard, even though, everyone was going through these challenges. And then I think if you're in a time of crisis, for me, I tried to keep the message really, really simple and honest. I couldn't give anyone here certainty. I couldn't say, by June, everything's going to be all right. And I certainly wasn't going to give false expectation. But I think in some ways, looking back, being honest about me as, I suppose, the figurehead of the squadron or in this leadership position, it was okay to show a bit of vulnerability and say, I genuinely don't know where we will be in 3 months. But reiterating where I know how we can control the situation in our own four walls of this brilliant 1940s hangar, renovated into a RAF style, a Red Arrow style. And that, I think, did help. I suppose that's vision setting, but short-term vision setting and taking it chunk by chunk rather than trying to go too grand too early and then failing to meet that vision. I was wary of that too. But the snippets, I think for me as well, trying to get the national sentiment. I talked about the VE Day commemoration. I could get a sense that actually we were probably going to get a really positive feel for what we need to do. And that's the message I put to all of the workforce here is you'll be contributing directly to that. Have faith, trust the measures that are in place are doing what they need to do. And again, that was a voyage of discovery because we didn't know. Testing wasn't in place as it is now. But yeah, we did get through that period really successfully. I think the cumulative fatigue of COVID was probably the most interesting aspect. I felt we dealt really well for the first 3 to 6 months. I think leading up to Christmas, and I think this was felt across the nation, wasn't it? Where we thought, oh no, that hope for Christmas, but actually we're going to have to lock down again.
Yeah. Those hopes were dashed, weren't they?
Hopes were dashed, and those hopes gave leaders in any organisation a very, very difficult time. But that's our job. I mean, you've just got to face it and find the new narrative. And I found that personally the most difficult time. Leading just before Christmas, I had everyone in socially distanced in the hangar floor. We've got a huge hangar here. And even that was a consideration. How do I communicate to everyone in the work environment and make sure that we're not too close? Everything had to be thought about. But that was a risk balance decision of I have to communicate and they have to see me in this environment. They have to see me in person.
Well, you talked about an elaborate display, and I, for one, can say how much your team makes everybody smile, because when you were on your way to an elaborate display, which I'll let you explain, for the G7 leaders, you actually flew over me driving with my 12-year-old son, and he just smiled from ear to ear. I think everybody's just delighted to see you. Tell us a little bit about what you were doing for Her Majesty and the G7 leaders.
Last weekend, we honoured Her Majesty's birthday, 95th, over at Windsor Castle. That was really important for everyone in the country with events have unfolded in the past few months.
And she loves you guys, doesn't she?
We do know Her Majesty very much values what we do here on the team specifically. The team were incredibly lucky to meet her in person in 2018, and we're very, very lucky to have met members of the royal family in various engagements that we've been a part of. But Her Majesty's birthday was a really important event, very poignant for many reasons that people will understand, particularly because it was at Windsor. And small anecdote, a good friend of mine who I actually went through staff college with recently he's the CEO of the Scots Guards, and we had never known each other before we went to college together, and we became very close friends. I'm very pleased to say we opened the baton for the Australian War College. We were both
impressive.
Both in Australia, so the 2 bombs were put up front. So we bonded very well. 2 years later, we were in a position where his Foxtrot company did the parade at Windsor, and I had the honour of observing, being a part of our team that went and did the fly past. Weather was terrific. The parade, and I think the whole Troop in the Colour this year just really captured what it needed to do and honoured her and the state occasion really, really well. And it was a really big deal for Red 1, squadron leader Tom Bold, because that was a big high-profile fly past in his first year as team leader. So part of my role here is to mentor and guide the entire team, whether it's the 19-year-old apprentice or our seasoned, yet in his first year team leader. I could sense his nervousness, which is a good thing. And he delivered a superb fly past, absolutely on the second, to the money, as it should be, because that's the way we train and that's what we expect. To land into Bournemouth Airport, 2-hour turn, flight straight under Cold Rose, and then display for the world leaders in a single day.
They say, don't they, that pictures speak 1,000 words, and the pictures of the G7 leaders that you had on your social media speak 1,000 words, I think.
They do. One of the strongest things we offer from the Red Arrows is we're a convening power. So we use it as a soft power around the world for various reasons. But in this case, to be a part of the World Leaders Conference, the G7 down at Carbis Bay, it was a most explicit example of what we can do. Convening world leaders together to make very important decisions in terms of representing the United Kingdom, the skills, the education, the fact that very ordinary people can be trained in this way and can deliver something like that in an aviation environment is a testament to the United Kingdom, And I would like to think that's what the Prime Minister was very much hoping for when he was hosting all of the world leaders. And there are 2 great pictures from my perspective. There is one of all of them standing kind of captivated. I think our arrival loop, which is just brilliant because they look not too dissimilar to the 4 and 6 and 7-year-olds that we see at air shows. And yet these are the people that run the world who are looking up at our display team and thinking, that's brilliant. It really does cross the full spectrum. And there's another wonderful picture of Red 10, our senior supervisor, talking with President Macron and the Prime Minister.
As you do.
As you do, yeah, indeed. It just captivates a really engaged conversation. It's broad smiles, talking just about the brilliance of aviation, not amongst all of the serious conversations that were necessary and are the point of the G7. Wonderful to, I suppose, offer something else to that meeting of very important people. We took a lot from it. And again, the public reaction was tremendous in that regard. So
you play a big role on the world stage, and one example of this is in the next few days, the team are going to Estonia. That's another important message, isn't it? And I suppose expresses perhaps support for NATO and the important work that's being done at the moment.
Very much so. So in these 2 weeks, we've gone from the Midland Air Festival, which is core aviation display enthusiasts, Red Arrows business, to head of state, G7 world leaders. In a few days, we leave to support more of a NATO focus. We have enhanced air policing in that region, which is very well recorded. At the moment, there isn't a British contingent there in Amari from a flying perspective. There is on the ground in Estonia. We're currently deployed actually in Romania doing our role there. But that's great because where we have our 4th generation fighter that is making sure that it's protecting the skies from a NATO perspective in the southern parts of that region, we'll be there in the north in a soft power capability and celebrating their Victory Day. It's an important element that we can help in terms of influence. A fly past, a display, some socially distanced ground activity that is planned really supports the overall narrative that we have, United Kingdom, NATO, and all of our partners in the region. Great for us because it makes sure that we take cassettes in and out of the engagement we're about to go and do. And that one's, I think, from a military and strategic perspective, a really important one.
You mentioned Her Majesty and the sort of relationship with the royal family. We know you're very much loved as a team by the royal family, but you had an experience with one of the younger members, didn't you? Or one of the youngest members. Tell me what happened when Prince George came to visit when you were Red One.
My time as Red One. In 2016, we were very honoured to meet Duke and Duchess of Cambridge at the Royal International Air Tattoo at Fairford. We hadn't been given much notice, as is the protocol, and we got the heads up that we'll be meeting a member of the royal family. This is your time slot. This will be the protocol for your 20 minutes. And then we found out who it was going to be. But I didn't know until very late on, very close to the engagement, that we'd have Prince George there as well.
He must have been quite little then.
He was. He's actually the same age as my son. So at the time, I think he was just turning 3. Anyway, this was a really interesting time. So we had just had the Brexit referendum. Prime Minister just resigned, and the country was going through quite an interesting stage of instability.
Flux.
Flux, that's probably a better term. Things didn't feel quite right. And thought, boy, I'm more unstable than we normally thought. And the reason I bring that up is the engagement with the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge it felt very much like an element of continuity and stability in a time when we were going through flux in the country. And there were mass crowds at the International Tattoo, which is a wonderful event. Not just for aviation, but for everyone, from 4-year-olds to 94-year-olds. It's tremendous. They were lined up on the fence and they watched the Duke and Duchess come and approach us by the aircraft. And such a wonderful engagement because I talked more about parenting than I did about anything else with the Duke of Cambridge. Talked to Prince George. He had remembered our fly past at his grandmother's house.
Oh, it's his grandmother's house.
And that's how it was narrated. And that's what melted my heart. Is you could see, my grandmother's house was a bungalow in Bognor Regis. Yeah. His one is slightly different.
Yeah, similar.
But it's the same sentiment to the grandchild.
It's grandma, isn't it?
And he remembered, oh yeah, there was colour. Yeah, I do remember the colours. We talked about the coloured smoke, invited him to come see the aircraft. So the Duke of Cambridge walked with me and Prince George. And as is well known, Duke of Cambridge served in the Royal Air Force. He's a helicopter search and rescue pilot. So we had a bit of banter between fixed-wing fast jet and helicopter flying and which way would Prince George go. And I was told quite firmly helicopters. I thought, yeah, of course. He sat in the aircraft, probably the most stressful 2 minutes of my entire Red One career.
Was that a nerve-wracking moment for you when you popped him in?
Yes, as is the entourage that follows the royal family, which again was an education in itself for me to observe. As all the cameras were zapping away, you could see my grimace of when the Duke said, could he sit in? I said, yeah, of course. And I thought, do I pick him up? Do I pick up the... Yeah,
the young ass.
Yeah, indeed.
Yes.
And again, this is where the parental understanding came. As we looked each other in the eye. Myself and the Duke came and he said, I'll do it. Oh, thank you. Anyway, we put him in. We talked around the cockpit and he really enjoyed his experience. He was really engaged. There aren't actually many 2.5, 3-year-olds that have been really daunted by that experience. And my goodness, he took it in the best way he could have done. He seemed to love it. So I do think he'll probably be a fast jet fighter pilot in the future.
Yeah, forget helicopters.
But,
Who needs helicopters? We don't need blades here. You must have so many amazing stories. I mean, I'm sure we could speak for weeks about all the different things you've done because obviously you're Red One and you've been in the team and now you're officer commanding. What are the ones that, if I had to really pin you down to a couple of sensational moments that you will always take with you, what would they be, do you think? Obviously, that was a really magical moment, but what else? What really stands out?
I mean, many moments in my Royal Air Force career, as anyone that serves has the highs and lows and things that are imprinted on your retina for the rest of your life. In terms of my Red Arrows career, I think one of the most fascinating days for me was getting airborne from a place called Da Nang in Vietnam and leading 12 Red aircraft across the South China Sea into China. And this was part of the Asia Pacific tour that we were tasked to do. And that was at the end of 2016. This, to put into context, was part of the political context, the golden era, as it was called at that time. And we were one of many ambassadorial elements to the UK, very much to support, I suppose, prosperity agenda. When you come down to tactical level, moving 12 Hawks that can only travel 600 miles roughly on a single tank of fuel, we hopped all the way from Scampton to China. And when I say hop, we hopped across 17 countries, engaged in almost every single country that we went to, right across Europe, we did in a day. Even as soon as we got to do our first legs into the Middle East, Ariel Sharon had died. So Israel had shut their airspace, 72 hours of shutting airspace. So we were already 3 days late before we'd even got across that part of the time. So we had to catch up, get across engagements in UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, right across India. By the time we'd got through Southeast Asia, been a long time. We hadn't even reached China yet. Team was tired. We'd had a lot of operational factors that, whether it was weather or aircraft not being serviceable. We lost one of the support aircraft due to a technical issue, so our bags were having to be, pants and tops were having to be flown on civilian commercial flights. I mean, all of these things were going in the background. We got airborne from Da Nang in Vietnam, and I had real trepidation, actually. I didn't show it to the team. You have to show vulnerability at the right time, and even if you're feeling incredibly nervous about something, you need to compartmentalise that and show them the steady hand that everything will be all right. Internally, I had no idea what was going to happen, whether we get turned away at the Chinese border, how the air traffic system was really going to work with us, because even in metrics, they deal in meters and feet, which is fine when you're in an airliner and you can immediately convert that on your instrumentation. We had Fablon cards stuck up on the dash so we could do mental conversions between meters and feet for air traffic control. But the reason there was trepidation is because we had Typhoon aircraft that were leaving Malaysia to go and do an exercise in Japan and South Korea. So this was a day of real hard and soft power mix for the United Kingdom in that region. So that's why there was working out what the response would be. We crossed the flight information region into China with no problems at all. Air traffic controllers wanted to bring us down too low and we would have run out of fuel. So we had to say, no, we can't do that. We had quite an angry message back. We replied with, we are going to stay at this height because otherwise we won't make it to Zhuhai, which was our destination just west of Hong Kong. There was no reply from them in 20 minutes. So I thought, oh God, I don't know what's going to happen here, but we're still heading east and we're going to make it. But when we arrived, all of us smoked red out of our tanks.
That must have looked magnificent.
12 red aircraft, smoking red on arrival into China. We landed, overwhelmed by the public response. We had no idea how many fans of the Red Arrows, the RAF, aviation, history of all aviation. We hadn't had contact with them before. And this is what we had. This is who we got to meet in our 3 weeks in China. And on a personable level, it was brilliant. Global language of aviation, case in point. And I think, landing at Zhuhai, it was an incredible honour. It was a real achievement as a team leader, but I say that as a team leader. Many people in the background, including my boss at the time, Wing Commander Higgins, had done huge amounts of work to allow us to go and deliver it. So very much a high point for me.
Gosh, you talked about highs, you talked about lows. When you were in the team, you were in the synchro pair. The dangerous ones, as apparently I'm told the Queen calls the synchro pair, you fly at each other, sometimes upside down at a closing speed of perhaps 700 miles an hour or so. And things don't always go smoothly, do they? Will you tell us, Monty, about the time when you and Wingy clipped each other and how that affected you as a person and your vision of the rest of your career with the Reds? Yeah,
of course. As you said, in your military career, you have highs and lows. These are two examples just from my time in the Red Arrows, let alone what I did outside of my time in the Red Arrows. But yeah, that was a very high profile one. Everything we do in the team is high profile, whether you're training or whether you're in a public show, for example. But on March 23rd in 2010, myself and Mike Ling, I was Red 7, he was Red 6, and we were the synchro pair. We suffered a mid-air collision whilst carrying out an opposition pass. Now, the aspect of being able to deal with that in the short and the medium term, I think I probably have to separate, because we entered a manoeuvre in a certain way that we hadn't done previously. And this is a manoeuvre we'd flown hundreds of times. By no means were we suffering from confirmation bias. Just because the manoeuvre works, we thought it'd work every time. It wasn't in that point at all. We talk a lot in here on the team about contingency planning. What if we suffer a bird strike? Well, so the technical issue, how would you react? And even with the way that we risk analyse all of our synchronised manoeuvres and opposition passes, we have a contract. And if you don't meet that contract at a certain time or second, there are escape manoeuvres to be flown. But what happened on March 23rd is that as we got closer to each other, and I'll speak only for myself here, Mike will speak for himself in this regard, but where there was an escape manoeuvre to be flown, which we call a conditioned response, because it's a precondition, we talk about it all the time. Cognitively, I found myself in a position where I thought that was more unsafe to do rather than to keep my eyes on my synchro leader and try and avoid him in a different way. So I went from a conditioned response to an instinctive response. And my instinct was to rather roll away and present what we call the belly of the aircraft to him, was to keep my eyes on him as we came very close, push down on the stick and to go beneath him so I could guarantee that I would miss him. But unfortunately, Mike also had the same instinctive maneuver, was to push down. And we did clip each other as we went past. We think we're the luckiest and unluckiest in that regard in terms of a synchro pair. A fraction of a different instinct of what to do in that last, eighth of a second, we would have been miles apart from each other. But if it had been 6 feet closer, neither of us would be here right now.
Wow.
Both of us, yeah.
It's such a sobering thought.
It was a sobering thought. He had to eject from his aircraft. He was knocked unconscious during the ejection. The fin of my aircraft cut right through his canopy, and that was 4 feet away from his head.
Wow.
So his canopy exploded. Mike's instant reaction, thank goodness, was to eject, and he got out safely, albeit knocked unconscious. At the final moment, I shut my eyes because I thought this is probably going to be it. And I thought, I don't actually want to look at this one, if that's all right. I was kind of talking to myself through this last eighth of a second and thought, yeah, this one doesn't have to be seen. I heard it. I'll never forget the noise of the thump when metal hits each other. So what we're talking about, 10 tons of metal in total at 800 miles an hour closure. The feeling on the airframe was phenomenal. And I thought that was the last feeling, but it wasn't. My hearing was still there. I opened my eyes. I was looking directly at the ground because I'd pushed down. Thankfully, instinct took me away from the ground, pulled back on the stick. Up I went, and I knew I was okay. Ooh, my aircraft is responding relatively normally here. The worst bit about this for me, in the cockpit in the Hawk, we have 2 mirrors that are set up so that you can actually look at your wings at certain times. In a training aircraft, it means that actually the student can see their instructor, and so they come in very useful. I could see in these 2 very small mirrors the fireball behind me. So I was convinced Mike was gone. So this was my short-term issue, is to try and compartmentalise, to keep flying, get myself down safely, and to address that tragedy in about half an hour's time. Because right now I can't process this. But relatively soon, that lasted for about 2 minutes. I was told by the senior supervisor across the radio that he's seen moving. And then I realised actually Mike is okay. Conversely, he thought I was gone. He didn't think I would ever have made it out. He thought he was the lucky one because he'd been able to eject. All he could see was a fireball behind him, so he thought it was both of us. So we both had this immediate sense of loss. For me, enormous sense of guilt. Oh my, how have I can't believe you've done this. It's your synchro. All of these things went through my mind in that first 60 seconds. But I'm very grateful to say that we recovered the situation quickly. Red 9, Simon Rear, turned up at my wing and said, "Oh, you're not looking too good there. You've lost a bit of this and you've lost a bit of that." Oh, thanks very much. But he really cut through the tension at the time. We gathered, operationally went through our contingency plans. I landed at Heraklion International Airport because we were in Crete. I was with Lingy in hospital within about 2 or 3 hours. The rest, we got through, and that's probably a longer term story to tell here, but I don't think we've got long enough on this podcast. But that gives you a sense of the immediate kind of trauma that occurred.
That's an unbelievable story. It's made the hairs on the back of my arm stand up, and we won't dwell on it because that's just a small part, isn't it, of a very massive career. And I do want to ask you a bit about time before the Reds, but also just want to ask you, Monty, a bit about you and who you are and where this love of aviation came from.
It started really early with me. My mother is British, my father is South American, he's from Colombia, and I was actually born in Bogota, Colombia. And the reason I say that is because I wasn't naturalised to the UK until I was 7. We used to fly back to see the family, that side of the family in South America. And it was the commercial air travel as a 5, 6, 7-year-old. For me, the smell of an airport, the way the airport looks, perceived glamour, which I now know the AV industry is completely untrue. But at the time, I was awestruck by it all. And as we flew in a very small aircraft, we flew in a jumbo jet across to Bogota from Heathrow. But then we flew in a really small aircraft from Bogota to Pasto, which is a regional town in the southwest where my family are from. And it was quite a rickety propeller thing. And my mother was so scared. I didn't realise it's the first time I'd ever seen the person that you depend on for everything in your life more scared than you. She gripped my hand. And I remember saying, "Mum, I'm okay." She said, "This is not for you. This is for me." And I thought, this is exciting. And it was experiences like that. I think that was in the air. I could see the approach into the airport. see the wings, flashing around. I don't know if the pilot had crosswind issues, whatever it might be. I just thought, I want to come and do this. And that was really the seed. And I think throughout my teenage years, I ebbed and flowed like teenagers do. At times I didn't work hard enough, at times, and then thankfully around the age of 16, 17, for any of the young listeners that I hope listen to this, it's never too late. I realised quite late on that actually I really need to pay a lot of attention to my academics to try and achieve a dream. I was very much about my relationships with friends. I love every single sport I can get my hands onto and clubs that I was involved in. So that really was my world. And thankfully I mentored and guided at school, actually by my friends. My peer group were really important, not just teachers and my parents, but pulled my finger out just in time. And that led me on to get into university, and I joined the University Air Squadron structure. And that was my first real insight into the Air Force, and just thought, this is the place for me. I would have flown anything I could get my hands on, I would have done. And I would have paid to fly, not being paid to fly. I still can't quite believe I'm paid to do this type of job. It took me 3 goes to get into the RAF.
Did it?
It did not come quickly. And I know there are many people out there that will struggle to get into the industry or the organisation they want to be in. And I had the same experience.
That's inspiring to hear, because particularly when you look at your career and where you've come, and you're OBE now and officer commanding, and you're at the peak, it's really nice to hear in a way that you did have to try hard and it didn't just come easily.
Yeah, I was surrounded to people that it came easily to at that age, 19, 20-year-olds that had the right language. Everything that they had brought, I suppose, to that selection procedure was better than me at that time. But the point was, I was learning around. I was observing people thinking, actually, I'm just me. I don't want to be a different person. But what skill set have they got that I don't? And I got honest feedback from the RAF in my first round of selection. In the second round, they said, you came incredibly close. Unfortunately, the Air Force was only recruiting. It was about 10 pilots in a year. It was a really crunch time where they had lots of pilots. And I thought, I think that might be it. Someone I was very close to at University Air Squadron, one of my instructors called Rod Newman, took me aside and said, you'd be foolish not to give it a third go, because I've seen something in you that they will see. And sometimes I think often it takes that, doesn't it? Someone on the outside. And I did. Gave it that third go, and I never looked back. Getting through the door was the hardest thing. And I'm sure in other industries it's incredibly difficult. For me, the hardest thing, once I got onto the steps of RAF Cranwell and I got into officer training, I never looked back. I enjoyed every second. I'm pleased to say, it's been hard work, but rewarded for that hard work as I went through my Royal Air Force career. So, yeah, very grateful for that word in the ear from school leader Rod Newman.
Were Mum and Dad really supportive? Give us a flavour of what it was like growing up with them, and whether they championed your vision of becoming a fast jet pilot.
They were, but they were really nervous that I'd never make it.
Were they?
I think as parents,
have you rung them and told them that you have made it now? Do they know?
They do know now, yeah. They're very proud. But it's all payback in that I think they just wanted to make sure that the safety net was there. If it didn't happen the third time, I remember Mum said, there will be other opportunities. There will be other things that you can do. And I really appreciated that, actually, because I felt that probably a little bit of pressure was off. The Air Force, even though it's a dream and to fly is a dream, there'll be another opportunity that comes up. And whether it takes another 2 years or if I went to any other industry, it would be okay. And that's the sense I got from my parents.
Would you have given it a fourth go, or is there no fourth go?
There was no fourth option for me. I can't remember. The rules may have changed now in terms of selection, but I knew that was my last crack at the whip. So, I'm glad I went for that, that last crack on it.
And then what did you fly? PreReds in your fast jet?
Well, I'd done my university air squadron training at RAF Woodvale. So I went to the University of Manchester, and I was part of that air squadron in the mid-1990s. Oh, that was brilliant. I mean, what a city to be at culturally. I was living a bizarre double life, living in a city with the arts and culture of Manchester as a student, with the music and the clubs, and my degree's in politics and theology. So I don't come from the traditional, I say traditional, this is what I love about the Air Force. You don't have to specifically come from STEM subjects, or you don't have to go and do anything aviation related. As long as you've got an aptitude of learning, you've got a chance to come into this environment. And I've probably utilised more politics and theology as a fighter pilot in terms of the strategic context of what we do than anything else. So anyway, it was a great degree. But then whilst living that lifestyle, at the weekend, I put on a flying suit and my officer cadet tabs, and then would be taught how to fly in a very disciplined and hierarchical and formal environment, which was very welcoming. It was a fascinating 3 years for me. At the end of that time was when I got through. No, that was a wonderful experience to have lived both of those lives combined. I'm just very grateful for the Air Force that opportunity came at the end.
Theology and throwing a few moves on a dance floor, which I hear you're quite good at.
Who taught you that?
I can't tell you. I've actually heard that from more than one person. You're a bit of a salsa dancer.
Oh, no.
Are you? Come on, you can tell me. No one's listening. It's fine.
It's just us two talking.
Yeah, it's lucky no one's listening to this, hey?
As I said, my father's from South America, so I think there must have been something in the genetics there that helped. But my parents actually split up when I was 10, and he moved to Vienna in Austria. So at times when I travelled to go and see him, he would take me to Latin American clubs because he had a community, wonderful community there in Vienna. And I think that's where it must have come from. So no formal training whatsoever, just part of my growing up.
And why did you choose theology? That's another interesting choice.
Yeah, I actually did business, religious studies or theology at A level. So I had quite diverse subjects at A level as well, and computing, science, bit of technology, and then theology. I just loved the cerebral aspect of it. I was really engaged of the history of religion. Manchester's a wonderful university for that subject in itself. And one of the best pieces of advice I was given is whether it's a profession or if it's a study, if it's something you enjoy, you will do well and good things will come from it. Bit of a cliche, but it's so true because that's definitely the right advice. Had I gone to something more technical that maybe I didn't want to do at the time in my life, because now I love more technical subjects, but then it wasn't for me. I just loved the modules that we went through. I loved talking about the philosophy of religion. That was a particular module and theme that I very much enjoyed reading and studying and writing on. And it was just brilliant to fly an RAF craft at the weekend, talk about the impact of the Dead Sea Scrolls in the week. I just thought I'm covering all gambits here of life. And I love both of them. Very lucky to have kept on in the Air Force. And as I said, recently come back from being given a year of education, going to do a master's in a completely different subject, defence and strategic studies. But the time I had at Manchester and living that Bachelor of Arts degree were really useful for that.
And you studied in Australia for a while, didn't you?
I did, yeah. I was really lucky. I was selected to go to the Australian War College as a UK representative. There are military colleges all around the world. We have a fantastic defence academy here in the UK, in Shrivenham. I was offered an overseas posting for that. And if there's one thing I do love, it's travel. Myself and the family went across to Australia, and I was one of 52 international students at the college, and met people from having done the China tour, having operated around Southeast Asia. Actually, it consolidated a lot of the tactical output we were doing that we knew had a strategic impact and effect. I managed to sit in that region at a fantastic college sponsored by the Australian National University with some very interesting Indo-Pacific issues that are ongoing to consolidate what we'd been a part of about 3 years earlier. So it was brilliant, and a great network of people, many I'm in contact with still. And my kids absolutely loved it. At the time, there was 6 and 4, and they had a wonderful experience as well.
So how do families cope, Monty, with life in the Reds, particularly when you were in the team as a pilot, as opposed to leading the team now as officer commanding? How do families cope with the time away? And do your kids think that every parent's a fast jet pilot because presumably you hang out with other families in your Scampton community?
I think time away is synonymous with all military life, no matter what flavour of military you're from. That is one of the greatest challenges, I think, for the other halves. But us, the way we try and address it is we make this very much a family environment. So when we are here, we always include the wider family to come to as many social groups as we can. Clearly, pre-COVID, that was fine. Been really challenging during this last year and a half because there are some other halves I've never met because it just hasn't, we haven't been able to do that. But that's the way that keeps the community very strong when we're away. And we're away actually a lot in the Red Arrows. It's our job. It's what we should be doing. We are not in an operation environment that we have previously done. Everyone's come from an operation environment in this team. So there's a different element to it. But nevertheless, when you're not here supporting your family, you're not here, and they have to deal with that. But the community is really strong here, so we're really grateful.
What does the future hold in terms of sustainability, climate change? We're looking now at being a very short time away from seeing in Britain vertical takeoff and landing, electric planes that will become part of regional air mobility. What does it hold for the Red Arrows, and will there ever be a time when we don't see that iconic red, white and blue smoke? Will you be changing in a sustainable way as part of the military?
We're always looking to evolve. Look at the automotive industry itself. My goodness me, that's got a lot of change in a very much short amount of time, and aviation is no different. So we are very conscious here on the Red Arrows that we need to maintain our relevance to the way we communicate and the way we operate, and sustainability is at the heart of that. So yes, we have projects in terms of fuel. There's a synthetic fuel blend mix being investigated at the moment. Technology is there. It's just making sure that we would be able to have access to a synthetic fuel mix everywhere we went in the world. The distribution and the wider markets are probably one of the more limitations at the moment, but that will change, and it will change soon. And indeed, part of the wow factor and what's a really important air safety aspect of what we do is the generation, of those wonderful colours that we put into the air. And actually, we're going through a project with Lincoln University, the Technical College here in Lincoln, and other academic establishments to find the next generation of smoke distribution that is sustainable. So we've got 14-year-old children in the UK working on this project, doing concept development. We presented the problem, we presented the context, and we've got industry partners that have bought in. We have a RAF experimental team at RAF Leeming that are going to cohere all this activity so they can bring in the industry partners to look at the feasibility cost. But I'm sure there is going to be a design and a concept change from a 14, 15, 16-year-old individual, young person in this country that will be part of the Red Arrow story in the way that we evolve.
But how exciting is that?
Brilliant. And it was brilliant to present. When we presented the problem, that was my job and my boss, Crew Captain Jackson. It's been our job to present the issue and offer the problem for them to solve. I'm not saying we're not trying to solve it ourselves, but it's brilliant to have engaged with them and work in a collaborative sense. So in the very near-term future, we'll have an answer to that.
I've been really lucky because 17 years ago, I did fly in one of your beautiful Hawks with Red 10, Steve Underwood. So I've had a tiny taste of a few barrel rolls and loop-the-loops and what it feels like. How does it feel to you when you're sitting in the seat and you're flying one of your stunning old aircraft?
Or sitting in the seat. There's a phrase I have that the engineers have always picked up on here that help with us on the strap-in. When you strap into the seats, you have lap straps, over-the-shoulder straps. You're connected to the aircraft via oxygen, safety pack, leg restraints. It's almost as if you're putting this thing onto you rather than you getting into it. There's an avatar link that you have with any fast jet aircraft you get into. And every time I get in, I always say, oh, home sweet home. I don't mean to coin that phrase, but it just feels like the place I've always want to be. The sense of a Hawk, particularly because it's quite small, it kind of hugs you as you get into it. It's quite small inside. I'm just over 6 foot, so it's a bit of a squeeze. There isn't much room to twist and turn in your seat, but that's okay. I said, actually, I took off from the G7. I was bringing the spare aircraft back with the team, and it's the first time I'd flown with one of our engineers, Natalie Sokol. And I hadn't meant to say that we got airborne. It was a beautiful day on the Sunday. We'd achieved the Saturday. As soon as the undercarriage, the wheels were coming back into the aircraft, and we accelerated past 200, 300 knots, 350 knots, 400 knots. We were low level over Cornwall. Because I'm now at the back of the formation on the front, I have to catch them up. I just blurted out, oh, God, I love flying. And she just laughed. And it amused her. She said afterwards on that trip, did you say that just for me? I said, no, I have 3,500 hours in aircraft, and I just love this sensation. It's such a brilliant perspective to be offered. It's such a privilege to be sitting there, and particularly when the world flies past at 420 miles an hour and you get to look at all of the United Kingdom in 20 minutes. It's just phenomenal. I think all the domestic stresses, quite rightly, the pressures that come with command here in this job, in that period you can put a lot into perspective. That's what I love about flying.
And what's the difference between flying the advanced, sophisticated fast jets that you've flown in your non-Red Arrows career to stepping into the Hawk, which is such a different kettle of fish. You fly the Hawk, don't you? It's raw.
It is raw flying. There's two elements. There's a cognitive element, and then there's the cognitive element that leads to your hand-eye raw coordination of how you're going to put this aircraft in the right place. From the front line perspective, very much in terms of the background of flying on the front line, you are coordinated amongst, could be 60, 70 other aircraft covering a 200-mile area. Or there is a specific job that you're going to do after you've done your refueling 500 miles away. In terms, that's the reach of fast jet flying. Whether you're going to patrol a certain airspace in a sensitive part of the world, when you're going to go and deliver a weapon in another part of the world because you're an operational theatre. Whatever those decision-making aspects are in a time-sensitive operational environment, when you distill everything down in aviation, when you come to the team for your 3 years, before going back to your operational environment, it's about how you think in a cockpit, how your right hand and your left hand and your right foot and your left foot, how exactly are they going to synchronise with each other? And where do you look at the right time? Where are your eyes looking at the other aircraft and you're looking at the boss in the sky? It's quite interesting here. We select seasoned, qualified weapons instructors, flying instructors, the very best that we can find in the Royal Air Force, who have been used to dealing with exceptionally difficult cognitive problems in a fast jet cockpit. 25 switch selections on the left hand, maybe 45 selections on the right hand. Radar picture, talking to multiple tactical air controllers on the ground, or you're talking to an AWACS that's 300 miles away. You come to this team, do all of that, and there's only 3 buttons you really need to press as a red arrow: white, red, and blue. And all you need to do is press them at the right time. And you would be amazed at how those seasoned pilots are working so hard to, in terms of capacity in their training phase, to make sure they are in the right position, saying the right thing, that often we get the wrong colour, wrong time. And you can often get red and blue at the same time. If you see a purple streak in the sky when you're observing the training phase of the red arrows, you know that pilot's working really, really hard because he or she has just put out both colours at the same time. So that it signifies how intense and how important our training phase in here, even from those that are used to dealing with very complex problems in aviation.
I think we'll need to come and do a part 2 with you because I feel like I've only really scratched the surface of the amazing stories that you could tell. But just finally, how do you chill and relax and get away from the pressures and the stresses and strains that I know will exist with this job that you probably don't show the rest of the team?
I have 2 young children, 8 and 6. They force me to switch off. I wouldn't say they relax me, but they take my brain away immediately from the work environment. So I have them to thank in many ways from the mental separation. I've always found that physical exercise, sport, mixture actually. I've done a lot of sort of open water swimming recently, and that I've really enjoyed. As a soloist, I suppose, but then I love team sports. So I'm really looking forward to when we can get back into playing squadron sports again. That really helps. And then time going back into education, going back to do the MA, I think reading and finding subjects I'm interested in has also been a really good way for me to switch off, allow my brain to reflect, and I suppose come back the next day with better decision making than I had the day before.
Thank you so much for making me so welcome. You and the team always made me very welcome here. You've been really, really generous with your time. And thank you very much for giving me 2 leg ups onto the wing. Was there any wing damage or is your thigh okay?
Thigh's okay. I don't think we have that on camera though.
No,
so I'm not sure the listeners are ever going to be able to see that.
No, you did give me a leg up and I realised yesterday's leg up I was actually wearing boots that had a bit of a heel on. So I hope you survived that. And that.
Well, the rest of the team pilots, it gave a lot of morale boost to watch the officer commanding get down on one knee and hoist you onto the wing.
So, I don't know the way you said hoist.
Wrong term.
Was it lightly, delicately propel me gently because I'm so light and agile. No, it's been a real pleasure. May I come back and do part 2 because I think you've got so many more stories, haven't you?
You are more than welcome.
Good. You've been listening to Wing Commander David Montenegro, Officer Commanding of the Red Arrows. Don't forget you can subscribe and download to our series at convex.podbean.com or search The Convex Conversation on Spotify, Apple and Google Podcasts or simply ask Alexa. Thanks for listening. Thank you for your company. I'll be back next week with another great guest. So bye for now.